Hey everyone, my name is Christina, and it happens to be that the southern portion of the United States, i.e., the states along the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, are in danger of a tsunami, after all. So, today, let me tell you how this chain of events began. I was innocently just checking out what's going on in the world and pretty much listening to what everyone has to say. And a lot of attention goes to the coronavirus, and I diligently watch for that too. But then these little blurps come across the screen sometimes, right? And I have to give credit where credit is due. Paul Begley and his sources. It just so happens that he decided to do a slight piece on the possibility of tsunamis in the Gulf. So, trying my hardest to find it, I was stopped short because I actually found a document, a PDF online from 2007 that explained a lot. Now, what Paul Beckley was talking about was the possibility of not just a tsunami, but the places that it was most likely to happen, which he kind of accentuated the Mississippi area, Louisiana, Mississippi area really well. But I knew from the vision that I had had that it was not going to be the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico disaster. It was going to be the Texas and the Gulf of Mexico disaster. But he did bring up the East Break, which is in the Texas area also. Again, he just highlighted that. And if you don't know what the East Brinks is, then you have no idea he even mentioned Texas there. And so here comes this PDF that I'm looking at, right? And I'll put the link down below, and it's kind of lengthy, but I can pretty much give you the breakdown. I'm going to read some of this out loud. The executive summary really is eye-opening at the very, very, very beginning of the PDF. It says, assessment, and again, this is from 2007. Assessment of natural hazards typically relies on analysis of past occurrences of similar disaster events. The assessment of tsunami hazard along the Gulf of Mexico coast of the United States poses a scientific challenge because of the paucity of both historical events and prehistoric tsunami evidence. The Gulf Coast of the U.S. is highly vulnerable to tsunami damage, because major population centers and industrial facilities are located near the shoreline at low-lying elevations. This is in comparison with the Pacific coast of the United States, where tsunamis are more frequent, but the coastal regions are more sparsely populated, and the emergent coastline is much greater relief. Therefore, the challenge for scientists is to define and quantify the hazard for these rare events. They're talking about basically, they can try to compare it to the Pacific coast, but it's kind of different factors going into that, because even though it's more likely to have tsunamis on the Pacific coast, the population's not as dense as it is out here on the southern Gulf Coast, right? That's basically what that's saying. It is trying to find other comparisons. Now, things get more interesting in these bullet points that come right after. It says there is sufficient evidence to consider submarine landslides in the Gulf of Mexico as a present day, and this is from 2007, I keep having to say that, as a present day tsunami hazard. So 13 years ago, it was a hazard. As there are clear observations of large landslides along the continental margin of the Gulf. There are 3 geologic landslide provinces, and this is what Paul was touching on. Okay, he touched on 2 of them, but there are basically 3 areas that are just really of highest interest to scientists. Not that there aren't other areas in the Gulf, but these are the 3 highest, highly noted, studied. Okay, so the three geologic landslide provinces are defined in the Gulf of Mexico: the Northwest Gulf of Mexico, which is also where the East Brink landslide area is. Okay, and the Northwest would be the Texas area, right? The Mississippi Canyon and Fan, and the final one, the final area is the Florida Campeche margin. For the maximum credible submarine landslide were determined for each of the provinces except for the Florida Campeche margin. So basically, the Northwest Texas area and the Mississippi Canyon area were of the highest concerns out of the three geological landslide provinces. Okay. All provinces contain landslides of sufficient volume to cause destructive tsunamis along the Gulf of Mexico coast. I repeat, this is what it says. All provinces contain landslides of sufficient volume to cause destructive tsunamis along the Gulf of Mexico coasts. Mobility analysis suggests that constitutive parameters of the east breaks, which again is kind of like off the Corpus Christi, Galveston, between there off the coast there, that's where the East Breaks area is. So they're talking about the mobility, the analysis of the mobility suggests that constitutive parameters of the East Breaks landslide in the Northwest Gulf of Mexico are similar to the parameters for other landslides that have been recently analyzed. Okay, so they're still comparing it, trying to compare it to something similar, right? And the examples cited are Palos Verdes and Currituck. All right, but it goes on to the next bullet point, so it just kind of touches on that, right? But the next bullet point says the largest landslides are found in the Submarine Canyon and Fan provinces extending from present Mississippi and former larger rivers that emptied into the Gulf of Mexico. So I can see why the scientists would be looking at the Mississippi area. I mean, especially, with the way it ran backwards that one time, back in the 1800s that we have documented. So yeah, I could totally see, you know. And then we've got that Door Point volcano right off the coast of Louisiana. So yeah, I can totally understand why they'd be looking at that. It's just my vision pointed to Texas, and I had done an you know, 8 YouTube videos on this vision that I'd had about the Texas and the Gulf of Mexico disaster. So to hear Paul talking, okay, and a lot of people say an asteroid hits and maybe does something to the tectonics or whatever. And they asked me if I saw an asteroid. I never saw what caused it. I just heard a big boom, and then here comes the water. It's bad too, so it maybe there was something that comes in from outer space. I don't know, but I keep tending to go to what is beneath our feet. I keep going there. Okay, so that's a part of the puzzle that I see, I feel it, that I keep having to look at what's going on underneath. So to go on without further ado, they're talking about the Mississippi area right now. They're talking about the available data suggests that these large landslides were probably active prior to 7,000 years ago. However, sediment supply, especially from the Mississippi River, continues to contribute to slope steepening and increasing fluid pore pressure in the sediments, which may lead to further landslide activity. On the northern Gulf continental slope, landslides may still be active, probably because of salt movement. And see, that was one of the things that that was another thing that really caught my eye, because I know that around the Texas area in the Gulf of Mexico, we have salt underneath there, underneath our feet and underneath the water, okay? And to see the water in Galveston 2 years in a row change colors, I knew that was pockets of salt releasing, which is probably making caverns, and emptying places. I know the salt does move, but this was something I'd never seen in my life. The salinity of the water and the color of the water changed like that, which really showed me that Um, the ground really is unstable. I mean, there are other signs, that I'd noted in the videos that I'd made about this coming disaster I was seeing, right? And I documented a lot of the sinkholes that have been popping up, the gases that were being released around the Houston area. I documented a lot of those things, okay? If you ever want to go back and look at that, the videos, there are literally 8 of them at the beginning of my channel, called the Coming Texas and the Gulf of Mexico Disaster, okay? But I mention a lot about that, and I mean, I talk about it in other videos too, when the Galveston water broke out. So, that the ground around Galveston is already shaky, I guess, so to speak, right? It's not as settled as it was. Something is making it unstable. And when you look at the things that were disappearing into swamps in Louisiana all the way to Florida, you can tell that all along the Gulf, really something has been going on. But Galveston really caught my eye because of the salt release, right? And the problem with Houston is the way that our the ground is beneath our feet. The If there are earthquakes, we're less likely to feel them, okay? Just because of the way that the ground is underneath us, okay? But moving on, uh, where were we? Hydrodynamic modeling of potential maximum tsunamis from landslide sources was conducted for the East Breaks Slide, South Texas, and for hypothetical slides along the Florida Campeche margin. Conservative initial conditions related to tsunami generation efficiency were used. It is likely that the seismic waves resulting from the 1964 Gulf of Alaska, see, they're trying to compare it to something again, right? And they use these words, seismic seiche is actually how it's pronounced. And I looked up the definition of seiche, okay? And because I really wanted you to understand what that word means, okay? And when you're talking about how did they word this? Yeah, seismic, that has to do with, an earth disturbance, like including earthquakes, okay? Seiche, I mean, that means it's a temporary disturbance or oscillation. Oscillate means like this, okay? In the water level of a lake or partially enclosed body of water. A temporary disturbance or oscillation in the water level of a lake or partially enclosed body of water. Now get this, especially one caused by changes in atmospheric pressure. Okay, so a simple change in atmospheric pressure. Okay, you think about the moons that we can have, just what kind of atmospheric pressure change would be like the last straw on the camel's back, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So the sentence is pretty, these 3 words are kind of telling when you read them. It is likely that seismic seiche waves, as in water, resulting from the Gulf of Alaska earthquake are nearly the highest that can be generated owing to a predominantly continental ray path for seismic service for the Alaska to the Gulf Coast. Okay. They say there are no significant earthquake sources within the Gulf of Mexico that are likely to generate tsunamis despite recent activity in the area. But that's what they say at first, right? But right now, but that's not what they said a minute ago, right? When it says, oh yeah, it's highly likely, but check it out. They kind of keep going on, okay? So don't just, all right? But the thing is they're not saying the tsunami is not highly likely. The words say there are no significant earthquake sources. Even though that there have been earthquakes out there, they're saying that they haven't recorded anything that they believe is significant that would cause a tsunami yet, okay? Nothing high enough, right? But we've had some good quakes out there, all right? Yeah, it says despite recent seismic activity in area. Tsunami propaganda. So what they're saying is that something else would be more likely to cause it. Okay, the tsunami that they're looking at. And they're looking at landslides on the slopes of the Gulf of Mexico underwater. there were just some things that I just couldn't believe. It says landslides occur in all geologic provinces in the Gulf of Mexico. Largest failures are found in the Canyon Fan province, but they needed more information. More information is needed on the timing of large failures, and I could tell in a lot of this that they didn't seem to have the equipment really that they needed yet to get some of the measurements and data that they really needed to make um, any kind of prediction on timing. Yeah, from this area, get a map. I took a snippet of it at some point, but it talks about the landslide deposits that are marked, and it marks. You'll see it if you look up the PDF, but it's this first figure they have on page 8, names the basins, the areas, and the landslide areas are marked really, really well. For Florida too, there's a close-up, but on page 10, the snippet I took was the one that was offshore of Texas, and that there had been a landslide offshore of the Rio Grande River, okay, not far from Galveston, so you can see that. Okay, on page 20, it basically says, these last line here says, most likely areas where future tsunamigenic landslides could occur include volcanic islands, which are possibly too distant to have a significant impact on the Gulf Coast, within salt tectonic areas in the Gulf of Mexico. Guess where that is? Off of Texas, it says, okay? Most likely area in the Gulf of Mexico where the salt, well, that's Texas, okay? And off large deltas that reach the shelf edge, such as the Mississippi Delta. There's some charts that's going on here, and I'm telling you, there was this area that was talking about Galveston, and I've just got to find it. Hold on. Okay, I think this is page 27. They're talking about tsunami observations in the Gulf of Mexico. And they start talking about this day in October in 1918 where the small wave came in at Galveston, all right, originating west of Puerto Rico. But there was some confusion going on, which looks like there was two different things that happened within a very short period of time, and one of them did come from Puerto Rico from the east, but it looks like one beforehand had literally come from Galveston. And yeah, okay. It says it appears that the October 24, 1918 NGDC date is a local date. All of the aforementioned reports clearly note that the waves recorded at Galveston did not occur on October 11th. See, the waves for October 24th weren't the same ones on October 11th. Okay. All right. Now it says right here about that whole event, it says it is more likely that the tidal disturbance was the result of a source local to the Gulf of Mexico in Galveston. If it was a landslide or a slow earthquake offshore Galveston, it would not have been felt. This event does emphasize the potential hazard from local sources. And I know in my vision it said there would be no warning, so we don't feel a kick or anything because we're less likely to feel that anyway. So that would explain why we wouldn't really know as fast as we should that there's a wave coming, okay? But the point of this part is to emphasize that it's not just the salt area that's off of Texas that they're looking at. It's not just the East Brinks area where they've already had a landslide. They are specifically talking about the Galveston area and how the ones with salt deposits, that's Galveston, is more likely to have those problems. And since Galveston has already been having salt leakage, the last 2 years, I think that's like really a potentially important sign for that area. Okay, so then it keeps going on. Maximum credible. I mean, you probably could read this on your own if you want to. I mean, it has so much to say on it, but I'm wondering if there was anything else. I know there's all this math afterwards, but that is what I'm saying, is that we do actually have and have had the potential for a tsunami in the Gulf of Mexico all of this time. But it wasn't really well circulated news. And so by the time I had my vision about this disaster that's coming, and I knew there's some kind of tsunami water issue going to happen, and I saw that Galveston and Baytown was wiped out, and I think part of my hometown too, along with it, because I came from that area. But the thing is, to know that they all have already been looking at it before, that this report, it says in the very beginning that it was compiled by the government. Okay, so this is no opinion piece, right? It's a team of people that worked on this, and it was data, a lot of data and a lot of history, and you know, um, really trying to map out and understand the geology of, and that took a lot of work. Okay, trust me, the Gulf of Mexico has been difficult to explore. But since this report came out, they did come out with a more detailed map of it. So at this point, knowing that they were expecting it for the last 13 years, right? I had a vision back in 2005 saying this disaster is coming. It's surrounding the peace deal with Israel. And so now Paul is saying, oh, look, now the scientists are warning that a tsunami is possible in these two areas in the Gulf of Mexico, coming from one of these two. And he highlighted the Mississippi area. And again, I totally understand why they'd be looking at it. But the other area they were looking at, that is the Texas area. And that's what I saw. It may be less likely, according to scientists, but it is not unlikely. It is actually very likely place to get a tsunami. And, so it's something that we really should be looking at. You wouldn't think that the Gulf of Mexico could be so dangerous, but, you've also got to take into consideration the fact that there's a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and a lot of pollution and Corexit, oil, you name it. You see these algae that come out? I mean, can you imagine all of the stuff that's in the Gulf suddenly rising up and coming ashore? Okay. Along with the debris that comes with it as it starts. I mean, seriously, this wouldn't be just a power wash. It would just make everything uninhabitable. It would be so toxic. Even if you somehow survived the waves, you could be in serious mortal danger anyway, considering the chemicals that are in that water. That's why, like, nobody wants to swim out there anymore. It's awful. Trust me. So anyway, I've also been talking about how you need to move away from the coast for a while too, talking about sinking cities and all kinds of things. So if you just want to go back and look at any of that, and I know people are looking for the safer places to be, and the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, anyway around, is probably not the best place. Try to move away from those if you can. All right, everyone. I just wanted to throw all this information at you, and I hope you understood it, and I hope that it will do at least some of you some good. Be on the lookout, be safe, be smart. God bless. Bye, everybody.